Hey everyone, I had a last minute whim to do a quick lecture on obedience and the Milgram article. Um, so, what lessons can we learn about political authority from these Milgram experiments? One thing that might give us pause is that authority in the context of this article has a different sense than the senses of the word that we've seen so far. For Milgram and the Milgram experiments, the scientists who are conducting the experiments and giving commands don't obviously have a right to rule in the sense that we've been talking about, nor do they have the power to enforce their rules. They don't have the power to coerce. So, what sense of the word authority is in play here is something that we have to think about carefully before we draw any lessons from the Milgram experiments towards our own political systems and nation states. I think the sense of authority here that seems most relevant is the sense of authority as expertise. Right? When we say so and so is an authority on modern art, or so and so is an authority on American government, we don't mean they have a right to command. We don't mean that they have the power to coerce you. What we mean is that they are experts in those subject matters. And when we think about the scientist, who's the main protagonist in these Milgram experiments, it seems like a lot of the deference that people exhibit towards the scientist is deference that is brought about by their sense that that scientist has expertise and that they should trust the scientist's expertise. But is that what we're doing when we obey the law in general on a day-to-day basis? That's one area where we have to be careful. I mean, the protagonists here are not political actors. And if it's the case that Milgram's just talking about a different sense of the word authority, that scientists and governments have very little to do with one another, then maybe these experiments have very limited relevance for how we should think about our political obligations and the authority of nation states. On the other hand, most subjects in this study did seem to obey the scientists' commands even when they had doubts about the moral propriety of those commands. And this does seem to be an example of a belief in content-independent authority, a willingness, in other words, to suspend one's personal judgment on a substantive question and accept the judgment of someone else in place of our own. And so if we accept that the scientist's moral authority is comparable to that of a state, then many, if not all, of Milgram's worries are at least potentially justified. One of the worries that Milgram has is this idea of the banality of evil, which is a term that he gets from Hannah Arendt, who is a Jewish political philosopher, and by the way, one of the probably the greatest female political philosopher of all time. And the banality of evil is a reaction that Arendt had to the Nuremberg trials, the trials of Nazi officers and bureaucrats and officials after World War II. Now, most of us believe that the presence of evil requires evildoers, and that evildoers are people with evil or perhaps just excessively selfish motivations or intentions. That is to say, in order for evil to creep into the world, you have to have a lot of people with bad motivations, bad intentions. And one of the things that Arendt noted when studying the origins of the Holocaust, how was it possible for so many people to cooperate in the extermination of 6 million Jews during World War II, Hannah Arendt noted that many of these people who participated and were necessary to the carrying out of this extermination program were just ordinary folks, pushing papers around, ordering supplies, or just moving people along from point A to point B. Very few people were involved in the actual killing. And Milgram tends to confirm this view. His experiments suggest that ordinary people placed in hierarchies will indeed do terrible things as long as they feel like they can shift the blame or externalize the responsibility for what they do onto others. They're willing to suspend judgment. Milgram also notes that this is even easier to do on a large scale today because of our society's ability to divide tasks into small parts in order to accomplish them effectively. Very few people see the whole picture or care about the whole picture when they are just one link in a very long supply chain to produce a final good. Most people work in jobs that are ultimately upstream from retail. And so when everybody just wants to do their job and feels no direct connection to the overall outcome, it's very easy for them to believe that they have no responsibility in the production of a massive evil. And it's very easy for very ordinary people to go to work every day and sign death warrants, or for that matter, shock people or even gas people, and feel that ultimately none of that is their fault, and they might even regret it and feel like it's, a terrible thing, but they're just doing their job. There's other people whose job it is to make sure that the machine is tending to the right direction, if you will. So, do any of these insights impact our thinking about normative accounts of political authority? Well, one thing that it suggests is that if we know that perceived authority in the wrong hands is potentially very destructive, leading people who are just good, ordinary people to be a part of massive, terrible things, then we ought to make sure that our accounts about what political actors and institutions have authority are fairly demanding. That is to say, our accounts of political authority should be very demanding, and we should only be willing to give content-independent political authority to the most trustworthy people, the people who have met the most stringent of requirements. And so that suggests a reason to make our normative theories of authority very, very stringent, very demanding. And in order to avoid situations where, again, we're all dragged along, despite ourselves, into a chain reaction that ultimately leads to great evil. Another thing is that if we know we have tendency to obey supposed authorities without question, like Milgram's experiments suggest, right? Over 60% of the participants were willing to go up to a very severe level of shocking the actor who's participating in the experiments, then we may need to ourselves become more skeptical and more resistant of claims of authority. So to put this another way, we might need to think about questions of authority and put our trust only in those people who can produce a very good account of why they should be in charge. Remember that going with the flow is very easy. Thinking about our role in a potentially unpleasant chain of events is definitely uncomfortable, and disobedience to authority, whether it be private authority in your company or governmental authority, can be very, very costly. It can cost you your career, it can cost you friends, it can cost you family, and it can ultimately cost you your life. And so, it's not easy to go against the grain. It's not easy to go against the grain in a psychology experiment where there is no cost to defying the authority of the scientist, right? You can leave at any time. You have the right to leave at any time in the experiment, and people still obey, despite the fact that there's almost no cost. So in ordinary situations where there are really, really, really dire costs, then we can see why very few people object, particularly when they don't feel like what they're doing is especially harmful. So, despite all the dangers of unquestioning obedience, it's also true that we gain enormous benefits from the coordination made possible by hierarchical organizations. The division of labor and the division of what Hayek would call designed orders into ever more complex sorts of organizations is is one of the things that enables us to live at the standard of living that we do today. And even in a spontaneous order, the spontaneous order will be composed of many organizations and hierarchies. And so, if our theories of what gives a state authority are too stringent, then it's certainly possible that we risk losing out on some of the benefits of hierarchy. For example, time and resources spent seeking consent or consulting with stakeholders is time and money that could have been spent on other things, and therefore some balance, or therefore the idea is that some balance may need to be achieved. Right? We need to invest enough money and time to make sure that authorities are not perpetrating evil on a massive scale, and we need to, spend some resources ensuring that that's not the case. But we can't spend so many resources on political authority and making sure that it's legitimate that we never reap the benefits of good governance. That we ultimately make our government so unwieldy that we can't reap any of the benefits that a certain amount of coordination in society can't produce. And at the end of the day, I want to suggest that maybe the lessons are very different. And again, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm giving you one possible take on the subject. But one possible take about what the lessons are from Milgram is that, first, note that accounts of political authority don't promise you that authorities will do good things. They only promise you that those who have a right to command will in fact have the authority to do so, will have the right to create obligations and duties for you. It never promises you that everything that you'll be asked to do will be right. And if Milgram says that belief in authority is dangerous, maybe the appropriate reaction to this fact is to forget about questions of authority, forget about whether states have the right to rule, and worry more about whether they're doing any good with the power that they have. That is to say, worry more about whether exercises of power are justified than whether they carry authority. Now, this view has a disadvantage that it's very permissive with respect to governments who do good things, and that's regardless of whose rights they are trampling on. So, if, for instance, a government decides that it wants to invade another country in order to impose democracy and improve their lot in life, well, if they succeed in the task, then it turns out that they will have been justified in doing so. Now, in the theory of authority, in almost any theory of authority you can imagine, invading another country, even for good reasons, is wrong. It's wrong because you lack the right to do so. You lack the right to rule those people. But if it turns out that annexing and colonializing or democracy promotion, if it turns out that all of those things bring about great goods, then it might, at the end of the day, be justified by its consequences. So you lose that advantage, but you gain the advantage that you're never going to give any quarter to governments who fail to perform for their citizens or anyone else's. So the flip side of losing the advantage of worrying about legitimacy and authority is that you can focus more clearly on bad governments, regardless of whether they have the right to rule. So those are some thoughts on what Milgram has to bring to the debate. If you have any questions, as always, you know where to find me.